Kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So we're in the book of Samuel, talking about David, and today's story is really about friendship. It's about two men who come together and want to help each other and want to be there for each other and what they do. And I could just read the story, and it doesn't take a lot of explaining. As you read the story, you can tell that these two guys like each other and that they work together and do all those things. So I'm just going to read it. We're just going to go home. Okay? No, we're not going to do that. No, we're going to eat and all that stuff. No, but there's something about this story that I'm going to be drawing out that maybe it's not something that we think about all the time. And so we're going to read about David and his friend Jonathan and just see the friendship, but there's something going on behind all of that becomes part of who we are. And it's kind of appropriate because of the membership that we brought two people in the membership, and we're all become members. And it's something that well, before I do that, we'll go back to chapter 18 of Samuel. We're going to be looking in chapter 20, but I want to start back in chapter 18. As we've gone through these passages, what keeps happening is that as David encounters certain things, he keeps meeting with Jonathan, his friend. And in chapter 18, it said in verse 1, it says, after David had finished talking with Saul, right after he had killed Goliath, and so this is the story that's right after that, it says, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. So they have this two guys, and they come together, and it says they become one in spirit, one together. And it's just a really great picture of what it is to have a friend, somebody that you can count on. We know from last week that when David gets into trouble, the first thing he does is he goes and talks to Jonathan, and Jonathan then tries to patch it up between his father and David, right? Remember that? Yes. Yeah, it was just last week. But then we saw that all came apart. And we saw that David went to Samuel and tried to get some help, and David's starting to flee from Saul, and he's having all these problems, and Saul's trying to kill him, which is a big problem, by the way. And this week we're going to see that David's going to go back to Jonathan and try to get this help. But I'm going to point out that there's this process by which these two became friends, and then it says in verse 3, Jonathan made a covenant with David. Now I think I want to look at that in the sense of a process. What we're seeing is that these two guys became friends, and then they made a covenant. They made a contract. They made some promises. In fact, there's this whole process by which Jonathan takes his stuff and he gives it to David. And so there's this ritual involved, this ceremony that they do, where they bind themselves together through a process. But I want to show that because the two steps are, first, there's some affection, some liking, people becoming friends, and then they make a covenant. And what I'm going to say is, well, first of all, let me just say that a covenant is an agreement between two parties to confirm a relationship. Right? So it's not that the relationship wasn't there, but they're doing something to make that relationship better, to confirm it, to establish it, to make it. And this is something that in our culture we don't do this much. Because when we're talking about this covenant, we're not talking about they just say, yeah, we agree to be friends. That's not what they're doing. They're doing a little ritual or a ceremony. And I was thinking about, as I was growing up, I remember watching, shows like Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone, and they would get together with Indians, right? And they would become blood brothers. You remember those kinds of things? So they'd cut their thumb and they'd put their blood together. Remember those things? When was the last time you did that? Has anybody ever done that? Yes. Some people have. You say, yeah, we used to do those things. See, when you're friends with somebody, then you confirm this covenant. And what I want to do is, as we go into this, we're going to read this whole story. And it's a pretty long story, but what I want to focus on is this idea of making a covenant. This is what we did today, by the way. Right. Tony and Barbara come up here. They're already part of our church. They've already got a relationship with us. They're already part of us. But when you become a member, you're making a covenant to confirm that relationship. You're saying, yes, we want to stand in front of God and the world and say, we're part of this church. In a larger respect, that's what baptism is. You stand before people and say, I have a relationship with Jesus Christ, and I want the world to know it. And so we're going to confirm that covenant by being baptized. We do this with communion. Communion is, do this in remembrance of me. And what does Jesus say? This is the new covenant in my blood. So whenever we take communion, we're reminding ourselves of this covenant that we have with God and with each other, because we're all part of the body of Christ. And so this is one of the reasons why it's important to do these ceremonies and these rituals and these things. I talked to lots of people over the years who, man and woman decide to have a relationship, so they just live together. And then they say something like, well, we don't need a piece of paper to tell people that we love. We don't need to do any ceremony. But what we have to do is look at it from this perspective of saying, no, it's important to do that. Because it confirms and establishes, and it lets everybody else know that this is a covenant that you are going to be a part of. Now that's marriage, but it's friendship, it's being part of a church, it's being part of other organizations, that you make this covenant not because you need a relationship. You already have that, but it's because it's a witness. It's a confirmation. It's establishing it. Am I getting through to you yet? Yes. This is why we get together. One of the reasons why we get together, and it's important to be together, because these little rituals and ceremonies become part of the process. Amen. And so we're going to read this story about Jonathan and David. And what I want you to see then is, it's not just that these two guys are friends, but they're willing to be committed to each other in a way that maybe we don't even think about friends this way. I mean, a lot of you, we talked about, sometimes we do those kinds of things, but a lot of times we're just friends with people, and we never really take that next step of saying, let's confirm this. Let's establish this. Let's make this real in our lives. Okay, so, chapter 20, verse 1. I'm going to leave preaching and go to teaching now, okay? But I'll come back to preaching in a little bit. Then I'll go to meddling and then do all the other things that a pastor is supposed to do. So, remember last week, David goes to where Samuel is, which is Naioth at Ramah. And then, so in verse 1 of chapter 20, it says, then David fled from Naioth at Ramah and went to Jonathan and asked. Remember, Jonathan in the previous chapter helped David, and he did some reconciliation. For a little while, Saul and David were okay. It says it got back to where it was before. But then David won some battles, and the evil spirit comes on Saul, and pretty soon Saul's trying to kill David again. Didn't last very long. So, went to Jonathan and asked, what have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he is trying to kill me? Never, Jonathan replied. You are not going to die. Look, my father doesn't do anything, great or small, without letting me know. Why would he hide this from me? It isn't so. Apparently, Jonathan hasn't been paying that much attention to what's been happening over the last. And I think this is kind of one of the things that we can see, is that Jonathan apparently isn't around all the time. He's gone doing stuff. He is the crown prince, basically. And so he's probably off representing Israel in other battles and doing things. And so he's not always around. We thought about the same thing when Goliath was challenging Israel. Why didn't Jonathan go out and fight him? And the answer probably is he wasn't there. Same thing here. He's probably just not around. But David took an oath and said, man, they're taking oaths again. Your father knows very well that I have found favor in your eyes, and he has said to himself, Jonathan must not know this, or he will be grieved. Yet as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, there is only a step between me and death. Jonathan said to David, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it for you. So David said, look, tomorrow is the new moon feast, and I am supposed to go, and I'm supposed to dine with the king. But let me go and hide in the field until the evening of the day after tomorrow. If your father misses me at all, tell him, David earnestly asked my permission to hurry to Bethlehem, his hometown, because an annual sacrifice is being made there for his whole clan. If he says, very well, then your servant is safe. But if he loses his temper, you can be sure that he is determined to harm me. As for you, show kindness to your servant, for you have brought him into a covenant with you before the Lord. If I am guilty, then kill me yourself. Why hand me over to your father? Kind of dramatic, but he says, just end it now if this is really the way it's going to go. So notice that the word covenant shows up again. We've made a covenant, Jonathan. I'm holding you to that. And then there's this little word there at the end in verse 8 where it says, as for you, and it says, show kindness. This word is a major Hebrew word in the Old Testament. It's a lot of times translated love. Sometimes it's translated mercy. Sometimes it's translated in other ways that try to show, because it doesn't really have a really solid word in English, definitely, that means the same thing. The word is Hesed. Or if you say it kind of Hebrew way, you have to kind of do it in the back of your throat and go up. Hesed, right? Can everybody say it? Hesed? No, apparently not. Most of you can't say that because you didn't even try. So, Hesed. But that word appears about 240 times in the Old Testament. About 100, half of them, 120 of them, are in the book of Psalms. But most of them, they're spread out all through the Old Testament. And the word Hesed means something like, it's translated as usually unfailing kindness, steadfast love, or mercy, depending on the context. And I put this up there on the board, this Hesed, because the word actually carries three different connotations to it. The first is faithfulness and loyalty, that I'm going to be true to my word to you. The second part is that there's an affection or emotional attachment with the word, which is why it's sometimes translated love, but it's a lot of times translated something like unfailing or steadfast love because it carries that first part of it too. So it doesn't mean just love, it means being faithful to that other person. And then the third is that there's an obligation or responsibility that goes with that. And so it's actually best described as, this is a covenant word. So when David says, as for you, Jonathan, show kindness to your servant, he's saying to Jonathan, you need to keep your covenant. You need to keep your promise. You need to be who you promised to be. You need to be faithful. You need to continue to love. You need to fulfill your obligations. And all of those things are tied up into this word. Now, this is the word that David uses to Jonathan. And as we read the story further, we want to watch for that same word to appear. Can you do that? Can you remember to watch for that word for like 10, 15 minutes? Just Hesed, right? Yeah. But we'll be seeing it in English as the word kindness. Okay? which is kind of an odd word, show kindness, but it carries with it all of those things that I just said. All right, verse 9. Never, Jonathan said, for actually the second time, but this time he's not going to kill David, basically. Never, Jonathan said, if I had the least inkling that my father was determined to harm you, wouldn't I tell you? And David asked, who will tell me if your father answers you harshly? Come, Jonathan said, let's go out into the field. So they went there together. Then Jonathan said to David, I swear by the Lord, the God of Israel, that I will surely sound out my father by this time the day after tomorrow. If he is favorably disposed towards you, will I not send you word and let you know? But if my father intends to harm you, may the Lord deal with Jonathan, be it ever so severely, if I do not let you know and send you away in peace. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. Father has been anointed as king, and so Jonathan says, God's going to be with you in the same way. Now we know from reading the other stories that God has already kind of left Saul, and he's gone with David. And so this is a kind of a sideways way of saying, David, I realize you're going to be the king. And that comes from Jonathan, who is supposed to be the next king. When Saul dies, Jonathan naturally would be the person that takes it. So Jonathan probably lived his whole life knowing or thinking he would be king someday. And here he is, kind of acknowledging, he doesn't say it flat out, but he acknowledges that God is with David, and just like he was with Saul, and so David is going to be the king. Think about how friendly you would be with somebody who's going to take your place. I mean, has that ever happened to you? Have you ever had somebody who was your friend, who you knew was going to take something that you thought would be rightfully yours? Yeah, think about, maybe Jonathan would think, in the back of his head anyway, I could just let Dad take care of David, and then I would be king. It would be perfectly normal for us to think something like that. But that's not what he says. I'm not going to do that. In fact, if I figure out that Dad's going to try to harm you, I will make sure that you get away. I will do everything I can to keep my covenant with you. Verse 14. But show me, and here's the word, unfailing kindness, like the Lord's kindness. Let me read that again, and I'll put, but show me Hesed, like the Lord's Hesed, as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. Jonathan's saying that to David now. And do not ever cut off your Hesed from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord call David's enemies to account. And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath or his covenant out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. There's that word, Hesed. Now David was the one who said it to Jonathan. Now Jonathan is turning it around to David. And he says, David, I'm asking you to be faithful to the covenant, to be faithful, fulfill the obligations, be unfailing kind, be steadfast love, be merciful in the midst of all of this. Because, and he says it this way, who is David's enemy? Saul. So when he says David's enemies, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth, he's talking about Saul. Saul's going to die. Jonathan says, as long as I live, keep it. But even if I die, continue to keep your word. Continue to keep your Hesed. Continue to keep the covenant that I've promised. Now, we can't get into it today, but later on, David does keep his promise. There's a guy named Mephibosheth, which I said it good, and so that's good. But that's one of Jonathan's sons, and he will keep his promise. Because normally what happened back in those days is that if you had a king and he had family, and then you replaced that king, the first thing you do is you kill all the other king's kids and everything. That's what you do, because you want to make sure that there's nobody claiming the throne, okay, from that family. So Jonathan's saying to David, you're going to be king. And I'm asking you not to do that. I'm asking you to keep this covenant even with my kids, my grandkids, my family. In fact, he even mentions house of David, meaning he wants David to make sure that his kids keep that covenant too. That's a pretty strong covenant that he wants to go. And he keeps using this word, unfailing kindness. We're going to read some more here. We got quite a bit to read yet. Then Jonathan said to David, tomorrow is the new moon feast. You will be missed because your seat will be empty. Because he's not going, because he's not going to let Saul kill him. So the day after tomorrow, toward evening, go to the place where you hid when this trouble began, and wait by the stone Ezel. I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I were shooting at a target. Then I will send a boy and say, go find the arrows. If I say to him, look, the arrows are on this side of you, bring them here. Then come, because as surely as the Lord lives, you are safe. There is no danger. But if I say to the boy, look, the arrows are beyond you, then you must go, because the Lord has sent you away. And about the matter you and I discussed, remember, the Lord is witness between you and me forever. What did they just discuss? David, keep your covenant. We've made this covenant together. We want to keep this covenant. And this is the first half of the story ends with this. The second half of the story, we're going to read a bunch more, but it's going to end with the same, Johnson's going to say the same thing. The Lord is witness. You know, that's the thing about, we just brought 2 members into our church and we make this covenant, right? Well, there's no legal thing that's going to happen. I mean, you know, if you as a member just decide to go to another church, I can't call the police and say, hey, they broke the contract, then we got to bring them back to church. But what we can say is, God is a witness. God saw this. God saw what happened and the promises you made and the commitments you made, and God will hold you accountable. And that's the thing it's one of the things that I do when I do a wedding, and the couple stands before and they do the vows and they make these promises, right? At some point, I usually will say to the people, you out there, you have a purpose here. You, along with God, are witnessing that they made these promises. You have a right at that point, then, at some point in the future, if those that won't keep that covenant, you can go to them and say, hey, I heard you make the promises. I heard you say you would be committed. Of course, we don't do that because that would be meddling with people. But God is our witness. Amen. When we stand before God and people and make promises, make a covenant with them, God sees it. And we have to take that seriously. God is our witness. So that's the how that a covenant binds the 2 parties to the terms of the agreement. Both David and Jonathan have been saying to each other, we've made a covenant, and now we're trying to press the other person. You keep your side of that covenant. You keep your friendship. You do what you need to do. You are obligated. You should be faithful to that. There's this affection that we both have for each other, but that could fail. But even if it does, you keep the covenant. You stay in the promise. I'm going to just take a little commercial right now. There's this psalm. It's called Psalm 136. And it's kind of an interesting psalm. We're just going to look at the first 3 verses. And it's Psalm 136. And you notice the little phrase that says, his love endures forever. The word love, Hesed. So when we read this, it says, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. Why? His obligation to the covenant that he has made with you will endure forever. Amen. He will love you forever. Give thanks to the God of gods. His Hesed endures forever. Give thanks to the Lord of lords. His love endures forever. There are 26 verses in this psalm. I only put the first 3. They all end, his love endures forever. After about 10 or 12, you're starting to think, okay, we got it. His love endures, we got it. We don't need to. No, you need to say it 28 times. Just to remind ourselves, when a friend passes away, his love endures forever.
Amen.
When there's a breakup in a family, God love endures forever. The rest of the song, by the way, is recounting all the things all the times and the situations where God has shown that his love endures forever. And this is our God then makes covenants he made a covenant with Israel, and then he goes on later and he makes a covenant with us called the New Covenant. God is a covenant-making person, and he expects us to be covenant makers. But God makes that covenant, and it's always one of the things that's stressed is God doesn't make the covenant before he calls people. He makes the covenant because he already loves people, because he already has a relationship with people. Then he gives the covenant. And so this constant thing in the prophets is, God says to Israel, I loved you before you were anything. When you were just a small group of people out in a tribe out in the desert, I picked you. I chose you. And it says same thing in the New Testament. I didn't choose you because of the righteous things you've done, or I didn't choose you because you were more special than other people. I choose you because I want to make this covenant with you. And that should make us go, wow, God chooses to do this. He chooses to be obligated and faithful to the covenant that he makes with us, even if we don't really follow it like we should. Even if we don't always make the right choices. We can just keep reminding ourselves, his Hesed, his covenant choice endures forever. It stays with us. Just wanted to take that little commercial and say, when we look at David and Jonathan and we talk about making covenants and we talk about, God isn't saying to you and I to do anything different than God himself does.
Amen.
We just are supposed to live the way that God does. Verse 24. So, David hid in the field, and when the new moon feast came, by the way, the new moon feast is actually one of the things in the law that says that the first of every month, when the new moon shows up, they're supposed to have a special feast. Okay, they're supposed to do a special thing. It's actually in the law, so they're doing what they're supposed to do. The king sat down to eat. He sat in his customary place by the wall, opposite Jonathan, and Abner sat next to Saul, but David's place was empty. Saul said nothing that day, for he thought, something must have happened to David to make him ceremonially unclean. Surely he is unclean. So Saul's giving a little bit of an excuse. Ceremonial unclean, one of the primary ways that you got ceremonially unclean was to touch a dead body. David is a warrior. The chances that he had killed somebody or fought in a battle and touched a dead body are pretty good. So Saul's just thinking, he was probably in a battle yesterday, and he couldn't come to the feast. He couldn't come to the festival. But that's not going to be true for the next day. But the next day, the second day of the month, David's place was empty again. Then Saul said to his son Jonathan, why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today? I don't want to go down that road. Jonathan answered, David earnestly asked me for permission to go to Bethlehem. He said, let me go because our family is observing a sacrifice in the town and my brother has ordered me to be there. If I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away to see my brothers. That is why he has not come to the king's table. Which is, by the way, it's the same excuse that God told Samuel to use. You remember that back when Samuel went to anoint David? Samuel says, well, what if Saul finds out about it? And then God tells Samuel, well, just go tell him you're going to Jesse's house to do a sacrifice. And then he does this whole process. But in this case, Saul doesn't buy it. Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan. He said to him, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman. And I'll stop for a second and say, look, a lot of people think that this is actually pretty cleaned up. What he said was not anywhere like this. It was much worse. Can you imagine a father saying something like that to his son? I mean, just think about that for a minute. What he's saying here. And as most people, anyway, don't I know that you have sided with the son? And he can't say David's name. Son of Jesse, to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you. As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die. Why should he be put to death? What has he done? Jonathan asked his father. But Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. If Saul has a spear in his hand, don't go anywhere near him, because the chances that he's going to throw it at you are pretty good. Then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger. On that second day of the feast, he did not eat because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. He doesn't say his shameful treatment of himself. He's upset because of the way David's being treated. Shows you the connection that Jonathan and David have. That Jonathan really sees this as if my dad said some of those things to me, I think I would be upset at him because of the way he's treated me, not necessarily. But Jonathan doesn't do that. Verse 35. Oh, I'm just going to point out something. I keep thinking I should, because it's going to lead me down the road, and I'm going to have to talk for another 25 minutes. And we got a meeting afterwards, and we got lunch. But the phrase son of appears 3 or 4 times in this. And one time it appears but it's not, you don't see it in English. The part where he says, where Saul says to Jonathan, now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die, is literally, for he is a son of death. Nice. When you use the phrase son of, it means that you have the characteristics of whatever they're son of. So when he says to Jonathan, you are the son of a perverse and rebellious woman, he's really talking to Jonathan and calling him perverse and rebellious. That's what he's doing. And that's why it's interesting that he keeps calling David the son of Jesse. He doesn't use his name, he keeps saying son of. So in this whole paragraph, the phrase son of appears over and over and over again. And it's probably that son of Jesse, Saul's using it in a very disparaging way. He's not talking about Jesse, he's talking about David and how David is not loyal to him. He's not son of Saul, he's son of Jesse. And he just has this disparaging thing. Just something that, when you see the phrase son of, just remember that attitude, that son of. So when we talk about Jesus being son of God, that means Jesus has the characteristics of God. Just as an example. Verse 35. In the morning, Jonathan went out to the field for his meeting with David. He had a small boy with him. And he said to the boy, run and find the arrows I shoot, which is always why you keep, that's why you have kids. So that you can shoot the arrow out there, and then go get the arrows, and then they run out there and get the arrows. Just remember that. Grandkids are good for that too, and great-grandkids for that matter. So anyway, as the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, the boy's running out in there, and then here's Jonathan shooting arrows out there. And it's, anyway. As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. When the boy came to the place where Jonathan's arrow had fallen, Jonathan called out after him, isn't the arrow beyond you? Then he shouted, hurry, go quickly, don't stop. The boy picked up the arrow and returned to his master. Then it says, the boy knew nothing about all this, only Jonathan and David knew. Then Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said, go back, carry them back to town. So when Jonathan says, hurry, go quickly, don't stop, he's not talking to the boy. He's talking to David. Saul's coming to get you. You need to go. You need to run. And he sends him back. This here's a real interesting point. Verse 41 says, after the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times with his face to the ground. Then they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. That's a figure of speech that probably means they kept doing this until David was done crying. He was ready to go. So he wept the most. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever." Then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town, and they will meet one more time just for a few minutes later on, but this will be it for them. That's it. And you look at that. Part of me looks at that and says, well, what's this whole elaborate thing? I mean, he sent the boy back to town. Why didn't he just do that? They could have just got together and talked, and you didn't have to shoot all the arrows. But I think that what you're seeing there is they had this elaborate plan because they wanted to make sure that nobody was watching. That if they had just met, somebody might have been following Jonathan, Saul might have been following Jonathan, and that would have brought that, and that they would have been able to get David. So once Jonathan sends the boy back to town, they know that there's nobody watching, and now they can come together, finish off their friendship in a very affectionate way, but also in just a very deep. I mean, they're crying and they cry, and they're apparently together for quite a while here. I mean, it says, that's why I said that David wept the most, meaning they waited till David was ready to go before they separated. But Jonathan knows he has to go. I just want to say a couple things about Jonathan keeping the covenant. So Jonathan keeps the covenant even though it is going against his father's wishes. Even more, it's going against the king's wishes. And then keeps the covenant even though David's enemies will be defeated, like Saul. And it means he will not be king. Jonathan sacrifices a lot for the covenant. So in this sense, we talk about Old Testament characters being a type of Christ. Jonathan sacrifices a lot for the covenant with David. Just like Jesus sacrifices a lot for the covenant with us. This is something that happens with the covenant. It happens with the covenants that we make amongst friends. It sometimes happens in churches. We make a covenant to come together. And you know what? Sometimes in order to keep that covenant, it means you're going to have to sacrifice things. It means I might have to sacrifice things. But that's part of the covenant. That's part of establishing it, confirming it. It's part of being friends and being together so closely that you're willing to make this contract, covenant, whatever word you want to use. And that's what we need to be as followers of Christ. Because we are to keep our covenants because God keeps his covenants. God wants us to be like him. So, whether you like it or not, Tony and Barbara just made a covenant with you. They're sitting there thinking, man, I wish he would have preached the sermon first. Let's pray. Father,